I'm going to introduce a topic that I wrote a little bit about, but Mogius has a question for us. Is KG the MVP of the playoffs so far, and has he actually found the fountain of youth? I won't speculate on part 2 of that. I don't think that'd be responsible journalism. But he is my MVP of the playoffs because he's basically everything that the Celtics team does on both sides of the ball. If he is not hitting jumpers and if he's not, closing out and rotating, both sides are really going to have trouble sustaining offense or defense.
Yeah, I'd agree there. I mean, MVP of the playoffs is a funny thing because it's such a small sample size. I remember when Andrew Bynum was the MVP of the playoffs a mere few days ago. Yeah. And who knows, the next game could be a really bad one, but the results so far, I mean, KG had just a spectacular game yesterday, an incredible game, and it wasn't just offensive. His ability, it's funny, we talk about his age so often, and he's not what he was when Zach Harper was a young apple-cheeked boy in Minnesota. KG's not quite what he was back then.
I've literally never been to Minnesota until about a year and a half ago.
I know. I'm just trying to concoct a false history of yours. But back then, he's not what he was. But I watch him, and he looks like he's the most athletic 5 in the game, at least when it comes to screen and roll coverage and just hedging like a monster and scaring point guards. Maybe you could say Dwight Howard, who's out with a herniated disc.
He comes at you with those arms. It's got to be terrifying.
Yeah. He looks like some sort of Men in Black villain.
Well, the thing about him is he's not even close to the player.
Not a black villain, a Men in Black villain.
Oh God, I hope you didn't lag there. That would have been unfortunate. He's not even close to the player he was when he was in Minnesota, and it's funny. People are like, oh, this is 04 KG again. It's like, no, he's not even defensively. He's not even close. But where he's better is he looks so comfortable in crunch time, whereas he didn't look comfortable in crunch time when he was in Minnesota. Not that he was necessarily afraid of it, but he was uncomfortable and always looking to make a play that was probably not simple enough that he should be making. And that's where he's really grown, is that he's comfortable taking the ball in the post or taking that 20-foot jumper when there's a minute left on the clock, and that's not how he was in Minnesota.
Yeah, I remember reading profiles of him when he was coming up, and there's one that stuck in me. I don't know if it was in Slam or where I read it, Sports Illustrated for Kids, one of those.
Sports Illustrated for Kids.
And it was about how he
still read it.
Buzz what's the guy's name in the back? Buzz, the little cartoon guy.
Buzz Aldrin. He says astronaut.
Okay, is that okay? Whatever. But he was like really good at impressions, and it was like this whole thing about how funny he was and how like lighthearted he was. And now, like every time I watch him in an interview and every time I watch him play, it's like every moment is so devoted to being as intense as possible. And I wonder, was he like when did that flip? When did that switch flip? Like when did he become that way? Was it slow or was it like a season that you can remember, Zach?
I think it was I think it was right after the contract. I think once he got the biggest contract that wasn't Shaq in sports, he felt so much pressure to lift this franchise out of the mud and the snow in here that it was just this overwhelming pressure, and he had to take everything so seriously. I mean, that's when he started coming out for playoff games, and he'd miss his first jumper. It would hit backboard because he overshot it so much because he was too amped up. I mean, that really seems to be the point where he was like, I mean, he couldn't handle it anymore. He didn't know how to channel his frustration. He didn't know how to channel his energy. It was just this outburst of psychotic, competitiveness at all times, because he was that fun-loving young player that was profiled by the great astronaut Buzz Aldrin.
Well, I think that's a great observation that he didn't want to let down the apple-cheeked children of Minnesota. But I wonder if it's also that he and Kobe Bryant have been in the league forever, and they've been in the league since they were in their late teens. And this is what they've been doing their entire lives. And I think what might happen is you maybe catch a glimpse of your own mortality doing this thing that has always defined you, and you just don't want to go into the abyss. I mean, you see so many musicians, guys like Bob Dylan is out there just being horrible, continuing to play because that's what he does. That is what has defined his life. And so I wonder if this ultra seriousness about it sets in because you just don't have anything else and you don't even know what else to do with yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. Garnett is 35 and he's been in the league for 17 years. So in like one more year, he'll have been in the league longer than he's been alive, like longer than he was alive before he entered the league. Like that is insane, especially if you consider that, like, you know, from 0 to 11, like you're barely a human. So his like, you know, vision of himself is so wrapped up in being an actual like paid warrior. It's got to be incredibly warping, and would make you, you know, focus and so intense the way he is.
I just have one fact that I want to throw out there. When KG was a rookie, Newsweek had an article that argued that the internet, this new internet thing they built, wouldn't work out, and they just didn't see it happening. That's how long he's been playing, and I'll pass it to Zach because I know Zach has a point. But I found that amazing.
I think you made a good point about seeing his own mortality because he wasted so much time in Minnesota while Tim Duncan, who was his rival, was winning title after title. I mean, he had 4 titles before KG went to the Celtics, and that's when his career, and at least his Q rating, like really picked up because it was just a sense of, it's not even a small market thing. It was just the Minnesota Timberwolves were never really good enough to care about aside from one season. I mean, there was always the joke of, oh, you know, they're going to make the playoffs and be out in the first round, but no one really cared about them, so no one really knew about him on a national level. And I think he's almost making up for lost time with all of this quirkiness and this rage and this, you know, supreme intensity.
Yeah, okay, quick question. Quick answers. What would you make of Pacers-Spurs finals? Oh, yeah, it might happen.
Ugh.
My response is, if a finals happens in a vacuum, does anybody know?
Nah, it's just like one of those Nets Pacers finals from back in the day. I think there was only one. It's just a barf bag. It's Nets Pacers doesn't make sense because they're in the same conference. I have an affinity where I don't know where. It would have been great. David Stern would have had to really pull some strings to make that happen.
It's the ABA finals, which is not a good sign.
Yeah. No, it's a bad finals for 2 reasons. One is that the Pacers, for all the basketball geeks trying to convince us of their worth and value, are kind of boring. They don't have a transcendent player. They have Paul George, whom I like to watch because he could grow into one. And then, the Spurs would just crush them. It would be a 4 or 5 game series. It's terrible. I don't even want to think about that. This is a disaster.